Our teams can give us great joys, but most years this steady mantra of wait till next year. But what if there was no next year? What if your team just up and left? Today's team did just that and established new roots 3,000 miles away. Like tearing a plant from the ground and repotting it, it would take time for new and strong attachments to set in, but set they did. From the borough of churches to the city of angels, today's team is the Dodgers, the Los Angeles years. Our story begins with the man most responsible for the Dodgers moving to LA, Robert Moses. Now, if you're not from New York, you probably have never heard of Robert Moses. And if you are from New York, you still probably never heard of him. For the full story on him, there are several documentaries on his impact in New York City. Robert Moses was a man so powerful he didn't need an elected position, but instead held several appointed positions in government. He made it his mission to get New York City ready for the future, a future filled with cars. The aging Ebbets Field needed to be replaced, and the Dodgers were looking to establish a new home in Brooklyn, on the intersection of Atlantic Avenue and Flatbush. Today, if you visit that site, you will see Brooklyn's only professional sports team in the Brooklyn Nets. Robert Moses wanted the Brooklyn Dodgers instead to move to Flushing, Queens. Robert would get his wish a few years later, but not with the Dodgers, as both the New York Giants and Brooklyn Dodgers, having exhausted their options at relocating in their current homes, pulled up stakes and headed out west to stake their claim in the land of opportunity. 58% of the LA Dodgers' first team in 1958 were holdovers from the Brooklyn team, including famous names such as Duke Snider, Pee Wee Reese, Johnny Padres, Gil Hodges, Don Newcomb, Don Drysdale, and a Jewish kid from Borough Park, Brooklyn, Sandy Koufax. So who should we choose as our first link in this chain? Pee Wee Reese was 40 and Don Newcomb was 32 during the 1958 season, and 1 year in LA was enough, as Reese would call it quits after the season and the Dodgers would ship Newcomb mid-season to Cincinnati for a couple of relief pitchers. The Duke of Flatbush was only 32, but without Flatbush, he was no longer a Duke, and his play declined before hanging it up after the 1962 season. Gil Hodges was 34 that year, and would stay with the Dodgers until 1961, when he would return east to join the newest addition to the National League, created in the wake of the Dodgers leaving, the Mets. He would play for the Mets for 2 years before becoming manager and leading them to their miracle title in 1969. More on that year later. Johnny Padres, the boy wonder who pitched the Dodgers to their first and only World Series victory in Brooklyn by defeating the hated Yankees in Game 7 of the 1955 World Series, would stay in LA until 1966. But his best day was in Brooklyn, and if he is to be known for anything, it was that magic day at Yankee Stadium. That leaves the two young guns, Don Drysdale and Sandy Koufax. Now, I won't keep you in suspense. Don Drysdale is our first link, as he stayed with the team until 1969. I told you we'd come back to that year, while Koufax would leave the game behind after the 1966 season. But we cannot talk about Drysdale without talking about Koufax. Sandy Koufax grew up in the shadow of Ebbets Field. Raised in the Jewish enclave of Borough Park, Brooklyn, he would join the Dodgers in 1955. Don Drysdale grew up in Van Nuys, a neighborhood on the outskirts of LA. Only 18 miles from the future site of Dodger Stadium. Drysdale would move across the country to Brooklyn before dragging the whole team back with him to LA. Two boys, one growing up in the shadow of the team's past and the other in the shadow of its future, would unite to become the two-headed dragon so fierce that the Brooklyn Bums would never carry that moniker with them to LA. Sandy Koufax and Don Drysdale led the Dodgers to 3 titles in a 7-year span, sweeping the Yankees in the '63 World Series, with Koufax winning Game 1, followed by Drysdale in Game 3, and then Koufax again in Game 4 for the clincher. Each won a complete game. As for Game 2, it was Johnny Padres again with the win. Between the years 1958 and 1966, the duo would go a combined 311 and 197 over 713 starts, while striking out 4,122 batters in 4,728 innings. This 9-year run would establish the Dodgers not as the bums from Brooklyn, but a new force to be reckoned with in the MLB. The party finally ended with the sudden retirement of Sandy Koufax after the 1966 season. Through the last year of Koufax's career, he was pitching in constant pain, and still won the pitching Triple Crown and the Cy Young, made more impressive by the fact that the Cy Young Award was an MLB-wide award until the next year, where one was given in each league. His arthritic elbow finally made him hang it up for good, but his legend lives on. With 4 no-hitters in a perfect game, he is considered one of the greatest pitchers ever. As for Drysdale, he would remain with the team through the 1969 season. At the age of only 32, his sore shoulder pushed him to the worst year of his career. With the team struggling, he retired after the 69 season, as the last Dodger to have played in Brooklyn. On opening day of that 69 season, a young outfielder named Bill Russell would begin an LA Dodger stretch that still stands today. In the bottom of the 8th inning in Crosby Park in Cincinnati, Russell would replace right fielder Len Gabrielson. In the top half of the 9th, Russell would take his first big league at-bat, a double. He would be stranded there, but the Dodgers would prevail in the opener 3-2 against the Reds, and Russell would notch the first game of his 2,181 games, all as a Dodger. No Dodger since their move has played in more games. To understand how long Russell played for the Dodgers, we can put it into several contexts. His first game was played before man walked on the moon, and his last game came in the same year as the Challenger disaster. His career spanned both Mets World Series titles to the year. His 18 years in Dodger blue saw 4 presidents, 3 popes, and the spectators at Woodstock's children grow up to play Nintendo, all while playing for one team in one city. After 12 seasons in LA, the one thing Russell hadn't seen was a World Series championship. The Big Red Machine of the 70s dominated the National League, while the A's and the Yankees would prove too much for the Dodgers the 3 times they did make it to the Fall Classic, but it would all come together in 1981. Even through World Series victories in over 2 decades on the West Coast, the Dodgers were still perhaps seen as not truly LA's team. Their victories were built on the arms of holdovers from Brooklyn. They needed a homegrown hero. Their prayers were answered in the form of the Mexican-born lefty screwballer named Fernando Valenzuela, and Fernando Mania was off and running. It's so important for a team to have roots in their community. For a transplant team, that is sometimes difficult, and it was made even more so for the Dodgers as their stadium construction pushed out communities of Mexican-American families from their homes. This, with the combination of their star players being Brooklyn transplants, the Dodgers had a problem connecting to the large Hispanic population in LA. That would all change on April 9th, 1981. Fernando Valenzuela made his big league debut the preceding year as a September call-up out of the bullpen, but on this day, he would change the course of Dodger history. A calf injury to Jerry Rouse would press the rookie into the starter's role for opening day 1981 at Dodger Stadium versus the Astros. The 20-year-old would throw a complete game shutout, and the roots for the Dodgers fully would take hold in LA as an entire city was sent into Fernando Mania. The Dodgers would use that momentum to capture their first World Series title since the days of Koufax and Drysdale, and give our longest-serving Dodger his title. For the full story on Fernando Mania, check out the LA Times piece Fernando Mania at 40, available on YouTube. Russell would continue with the Dodgers for another 5 seasons, getting all the way to 1986. His last really productive year as a defensive shortstop was 1983. That year, on September 1st, the Dodgers would make a trip north of the border to Montreal. While starting shortstop, Russell would play behind Orel Hershiser, making his big league debut coming out of the bullpen for an inning surrendering 3 runs in an 8-3 Expos victory. The loss would have no great consequence for the Dodgers, as they took their division but were bounced in the NLCS by the Phillies. But on that night, a star was born. Not the kind of star that Fernando Valenzuela had, but the kind of star that a team could ride the back of all the way to a World Series championship. Hershiser was born in Buffalo, New York, and spent his youth in Canada and New Jersey, not exactly baseball havens, as the long winters aren't conducive to the warm weather sport. His high school in the suburbs of Philadelphia is about an hour away from the New Jersey high school Mike Trout attended, so if you're going to be a star baseball player from New Jersey, you're going to do it in LA. Hershiser was selected in the 17th round of the 1979 draft by the Dodgers. Joe McIlvaine, a scout with the Mets organization, labeled him as having no command or control, fastball lacking velocity for a big man, doesn't throw a curveball properly, but has possibilities, didn't like arm action as he labors through the throwing zone, delivery inconsistent through several wild pitches, looks like he rattles easily, questionable makeup with physical question marks, and a 21-year-old leaves me with an empty feeling about him. Hershiser would get his first start on May 26, 1984 against those same Mets. He would get the spot start from another injury to Jerry Rouse. Through Hershiser's first 4 years, he pitched to a 60-41 record with a 2.91 ERA. His 85 season at 26 was a foretelling of things to come, as he put up 19 wins and a 2.03 ERA and a career-best 171 ERA+. But it was his 1988 season that would cement his legacy and etch his name into baseball mythology with an astounding 59 consecutive innings scoreless streak. On August 30th, again in Montreal, Orel Hershiser would surrender back-to-back hits to Tim Raines and Dave Martinez. These two hits would drive in the final two runs Hershiser would surrender all year. Beginning in the 6th, Orel would start a streak for the ages. On September 28th, Hershiser would take the mound for his final start of the season. He was 9 innings short of tying the all-time consecutive innings scoreless streak, held by none other than Don Drysdale, who set the mark at 58 in 1968. Don Drysdale would be in attendance for Hershiser's record-tying attempt, as he was announcing the game with the legendary Vin Scully. Hershiser breezed through the 9 innings, allowing only one runner to reach scoring position. He had done his part, and in a way, the Dodgers offense did theirs. They were unable to plate a run against the Padres' Andy Hawkins. Both pitchers would go out for the 10th. Hershiser didn't initially want to go out for the 10th, and instead wanted to remain tied with Drysdale, but manager Tommy Lasorda, always the showman, would have none of it and sent him out for the 10th inning. Marvell Wayne would strike out for the first out of the 10th, but a wild pitch would allow him to reach first. Benito Santiago would sacrifice him over to second. Santiago had a personal reason to want to break Hershiser's scoreless streak, as Orel had snapped his 34-game hitting streak a year earlier, which was a catcher and rookie record, and only 11 short of the NL record held by Wee Willie Keeler, who we will meet in part 2 of the Dodger story when he was a member of the club in their Brooklyn days. With one out and a runner on second, Randy Reddy would ground out to short but advance the runner to third. An intentional walk to Gary Templeton would set up a showdown with Kevin Moreland. On the 5th pitch of the at-bat, Moreland would fly out to right field, stranding the runner and giving Hershiser the all-time record. The game would eventually be decided in the 16th, but none of that mattered, as the eventual Cy Young winner would lead the Dodgers to their second title of the decade. Hershiser would dominate the Mets in the NLCS, and the iconic Kirk Gibson home run in Game 1 of the World Series would push the Dodgers over the top in 5 games over the A's. Hershiser would play another 6 seasons for the Dodgers and finish his career at age 41. He would return to the Dodgers in 2000 to retire after stints with the Indians, Giants, and Mets. In 1994, Hershiser's final year with the Dodgers, a new young starter would make his debut for the Dodgers. A first-round draft pick the prior year, Darren Dreiford was to be the next great Dodger pitcher to continue the line. Injuries and inconsistencies would not allow for Dreiford to carry on that torch, and would end up saddling the Dodgers with one of their worst contracts. On April 7th of 1994, Dreiford would jog to the pitcher's mound at Dodger Stadium for his first Major League appearance in relief of Ramon Martinez. Martinez had pitched 8 innings of 1-run ball, but the Dodgers would be shut out 1-0. Dreiford, for his part, would breeze through the 9th, pitching a perfect inning. His second ever game would be in relief of Hershiser himself, as the Dodgers would be bested by the Braves. Dreiford would make 27 appearances in the strike-shortened 94 season, but an injury would sideline him for the entirety of the 1995 season. He would return to the bullpen for 96 and 7 as an effective late-inning setup man. The Dodgers were in the midst of an unprecedented run where they had 5 consecutive NL Rookie of the Year winners, and were in contention throughout that period. Karros, Piazza, Mondesi, Nomo, and Hollinsworth would lead the charge into the 98 season, as Dreiford would begin his career as a starter. But times were changing in Dodgerland. On July 29th of 1996, longtime manager of the Dodgers, Tommy Lasorda, announced his retirement following a heart attack. Fittingly, his coach, Bill Russell, would take over managerial duties. It's difficult to talk about the Los Angeles Dodgers and not mention Tommy Lasorda. Appointed manager in 1976 after the O'Malleys bought out their partners to become sole owners of the Dodgers, Lasorda would become a fixture of baseball for the next 2 decades. A failed pitcher in his youth, having played parts of 2 seasons with the Dodgers in Brooklyn, he would shift to scouting and then managing. His larger-than-life personality and antics, combined with his competitive spirit, brought joy to fans in whichever city the Dodgers were playing. Lasorda was the first manager of the Dodgers that managed exclusively in LA, but his time in Brooklyn as a player meant that his retirement severed the final connection the Dodgers had to their historic and often mythologized past. Tommy Lasorda's epic arguments with umpires and mascots would go on to legend status, but his love of the game was real, and his last act as a manager would bring the gold medal home for the U.S. team in the 2000 Sydney Olympics. Lasorda took a team of unproven kids, led by eventual All-Star Ben Sheets, over the 2-time Olympic defending gold medal team from Cuba, and bested them in the finals 4-0, becoming the only manager to ever win a World Series and an Olympic gold medal. After Lasorda's departure from the team, the Dodgers would be sold. On March 19th of 1998, Peter O'Malley sold the Dodgers to News Corp, and the family that moved the Dodgers from Brooklyn would relinquish control of the team they had owned for over 50 years. A disappointing first half, mixed with a change in ownership, would see the Dodgers move future Hall of Famer Mike Piazza, who was drafted in the 66th round as a favor to Lasorda, to Florida before he was traded to the Mets 2 weeks later. Dryford finished with an 8-12 record and an ERA of 4. The Dodgers would end the season in third place in the West, 15 games behind eventual National League champion Padres. Dryford would have his best season as a starter in his contract year of 2000. With an ERA plus of 104, Dryford was seen as a solid number 3 in the rotation behind Chan-Ho Park and Kevin Brown. Park and Dryford came up together in '94, but it would be Dryford who would hit free agency first and force the Dodgers to decide. Dryford would sign a 5-year, $55 million contract, and Park would leave the following season in an equally bad contract for the Rangers. Brown, Dryford, and Park would all have top 10 worst contracts of the decade, according to Bleacher Report. Unfortunately, Dryford would start only 16 games in 2001 and miss the entirety of the 2002 season due to elbow reconstruction surgery. When Dryford returned to finish out his contract, he was damaged goods and had an ERA plus of 97 over the 2 seasons, winning only 5 games and posting a 4.22 ERA. Dryford's time in LA was over, but the tumultuous times for the Dodgers was just beginning, as the Dodgers would again be sold in 2004 to Boston businessman Frank McCourt. The new owner would bring in A's guru Paul DePodesta, the man who was the basis for Jonah Hill's character in the movie Moneyball. On July 30th of 2004, the Dodgers held a 3.5-game lead on the Padres for the division. DePodesta would come together with the Marlins on a 6-player deal for the high OPB bat of Hip-Hop Choi and Marlins World Series hero Brad Penny. In return, Juan Encarnacion would head back to Florida, the same team who had traded him to the Dodgers just 8 months earlier. While the Dodgers finished the season in first place, an injury to Penny in August would see Penny start just one more game for the Dodgers that year and be left off the playoff roster, where the Dodgers would get bested by the Cardinals 3-1 in the division series. Brad Penny would stay with the Dodgers until 2008. His time in LA saw the Dodgers reach the postseason 3 times, 2004, 2006, and 2008, but Penny would pitch in just one playoff game, coming out of the bullpen and losing Game 1 of 2006 NLDS versus the Mets, where Paul LaDuca, the man he was traded for, would make a highlight-worthy tag of 2 players at the plate in the same play. That play was started by Sean Green, another former Dodger cast off by the DePodesta regime. Brad Penny's time in LA was their most bizarre period, as ownership would chase a ring through the acquisition of former winning managers and players that could fill a trivia list of players that you never knew played for the Dodgers because their names are so closely associated with other teams. Names like Jeff Kent, Nomar Garciaparra, Greg Maddux, and Manny Ramirez. The Penny trade was a controversial one in 2004 and never really bore fruit. While not a poor pitcher, he wasn't what the Dodgers needed or thought they were getting. Penny would start only 19 games in 2008, his last year in LA, but his most significant one may have been on May 24th. Not for the result, as Penny would get tagged with the loss as the Cardinals beat the Dodgers 4-0, but for the beauty of continuity, as the next day's starter was the Major League debut of Clayton Kershaw. It's not always the case on these lists where the most prominent players get a spot, so it's nice that Kershaw will bring us home. In his debut, the 20-year-old lefty would take the mound at the same age as Fernando Valenzuela did, and with the same devastating curveball that Koufax once wowed the majors with. Clayton Kershaw's rookie campaign wasn't great. In fact, it didn't even garner 1 vote for Rookie of the Year. But starting in 2009, the world would begin to see that the best pitcher on the planet was once again a Dodger. Kershaw, like the Dodgers, would put the baseball world on notice beginning in 2011. The Dodgers would be sold to a new ownership group following the nasty divorce of owner Frank McCourt. On October 17th of 2011, there was no baseball, as the Cardinals and Rangers would prepare to face off in the Fall Classic, and a classic it was. I'm sure we'll see more on that when we get to the Rangers episode. Frank McCourt reached divorce settlement with his wife on that day, setting in motion the sale to the Guggenheim Group in May of the next year. Exactly 1 month later, Kershaw would win his first Cy Young. The 23-year-old would lead all of baseball with an astounding 2.28 ERA, then follow it up in 2013 with the first of 2 consecutive Cy Youngs, posting an eye-popping 1.83 ERA, good for a 197 ERA+, topping it all off with the 2014 NL MVP award, becoming one of only 12 pitchers to have won the award since the advent of the Cy Young Award in 1956. Kershaw could have, and perhaps should have, won 4 consecutive Cy Youngs, as he finished second in voting in 2012 to knuckleballer R.A. Dickey, who was the feel-good story of the year, as he won 20 games for a 74-win Mets team. Kershaw had a better ERA and WAR, but being up against a 20-game winner was a hard bar to overcome. Regardless, Kershaw would finish top 5 in Cy Young voting for 7 consecutive years between 2011 and 2017. He's been so good for so long that we often overlook his greatness and forget that he is the same age as Jacob deGrom. a man who won his first Cy Young 7 years after Kershaw's first. Like Mike Trout, who plays only a few miles away, greatness has become expected, but it should never be banal. The great knock on Kershaw was as the Dodgers became the super team of the 2010s, they could never get over the hump and grab that World Series ring. Kershaw's 13-12 postseason record, nor his 4.22 ERA in October baseball, should allow us to look past what we are witness to. Drysdale and Koufax, Valenzuela and Hershiser. These are names for the ages for Dodger fans, and Kershaw is a true successor to their legacy. But the ring. Oh yes, the ring. October 2020. It's the COVID-shortened season and the playoffs are a bizarre 16-team March Madness-style bracket. Round 1. Dodgers-Brewers. Kershaw closed out the shortened 2-game series sweep, tossing 8 innings of 3-hit shutout baseball. Round 2. Dodgers-Padres. Kershaw gets the win in Game 2 with a quality start, going 6 and surrendering 3, as the Dodgers swept the Padres in 3 games. Round 3. Dodgers-Braves. Kershaw gets knocked around for 4 runs over 5 innings in his lone start, but the team picks him up as the Dodgers prevail in a hard-fought 7-game series. Round 4. Dodgers-Rays. Kershaw wants this. He needs this. He gets the ball for Game 1 and gets the win, pitching 6 innings and surrendering 1 run. Game 5, the series is tied 2 games apiece. Kershaw to the mound, where he battles for 5 2/3 innings, giving up 2 runs and earning the victory as the Dodgers move to just 1 game away from their first title in 32 years. Kershaw would have to play spectator for Game 6, as a series of unfortunate events for Rays starter Nick Anderson would lead to a 2-run 6th inning for the Dodgers, and a Betts home run in the 8th would cement the title for LA and give Kershaw the ring he has so longed for. Kershaw is a fitting final entrant for our list, as lefty domination from the mound has been the baton passed down for this team. At age 35, Kershaw will pitch again for the Dodgers in 2023 and will continue to hold the last place in this list at least for 1 more year. So there you have it, from Drysdale to Russell, to Hershiser, to Dreifert, to Penny, to Kershaw. 6 degrees from team inception.
Rolling down Imperial Highway, the big nasty redhead at my side. Santa Ana winds blowing hot from the north, and we were born to ride. Roll down the window, put down the top, crank up